Everyone wants to be happy, but research has been showing that we have been very wrong about how to find happiness. Picture yourself as a container. We tend to think that if the container of self gets a little low on happiness, then of course we've got to fill it up. The problem is we think we got to fill it up with stuff outside of ourselves. And so we try to throw some money into the container of self, and then we try to throw a bigger house, a faster car, some new experiences, heck, maybe some new friends. And this works, right? Well, kind of. I mean, if you had stepped into your car this morning and inhaled some new car scent, I bet that would have felt at least a little bit like happiness. Or if you were boarding a cruise ship today, most of you would say, yeah, I'm confident that that would increase my levels of happiness. You see, it does work. The problem is it just doesn't work for very long. You see, we're like a strainer. As soon as stuff goes in, it goes right back out. It's like day 4 of the cruise, and we're like, I hate boats. I just want to go home. You see, this pouring stuff from outside of ourselves into us approach to finding happiness, it just doesn't really work. Here's a great way to test your view on happiness. Answer this question. If you won the lottery, would it make you happier? Now, I know what you're thinking. The right answer is to say no, I think, because you can't buy happiness. But deep down you're thinking, yes, of course, millions of dollars flooding into my life. Who wouldn't be happy with that? But instead, research of those who actually won the lottery shows that their happiness curve looks just like that. Flat. In fact, I can't find a single piece of research that shows any correlation between increased wealth and increased happiness. Let me introduce you to one psychologist. His name is Csikszentmihalyi. The toughest name to spell. I dare you to try it. Well, Csikszentmihalyi devoted his life to studying human happiness. And through his extensive studies, he found that the greatest moments of happiness for human beings come not when they are trying to pour stuff from the outside in, but actually when they are pouring from the inside out. Whenever a person was pouring themselves into an activity in which they had an area of expertise. Let me explain. Whenever a person engages in an activity at the apex of their skill level, and they're fully challenged in that moment, they would encounter a state that he labeled flow. Let me tell you about the first time I experienced flow. I was a college student, and me and my friends, we had gotten into rock climbing. And so for years, I've been climbing multiple days a week. And I loved climbing. It's intense, it was physically challenging, mentally challenging, loved everything about it. And 9 times out of 10, whenever I was climbing, part of the reason I loved it is because I was so over-challenging myself. It was such a struggle to overcome and to overcome mentally and to overcome physically, and all the rest. The other 1 time out of 10 was climbing something so easy. It was, it was what it was, a walk in the park. But this one day was different. I started working my way up this climb, and I noticed that unlike the normal attempt at climbing, I found myself just kind of almost moving effortlessly, placing the gear and clipping the rope and making my way up. And I don't know how else to describe this except for at some point it felt like all of time had stood still. Like I could have been doing this for hours and it just felt like a single moment. In fact, I forgot about everything that was happening in the world except for this one single activity. I was completely focused in, and it was an incredible experience. Later, I found out that that is called flow. According to Csikszentmihalyi, extreme adventure sports are one of the primary places where it's easy to observe flow, because that is where people are pushing their mind and their body to the limits of human capacity. But that's not the only place he found flow. In fact, he found flow in some composers, but not just any composers. Highly trained, highly skilled composers would tell him about moments in their life where they sat down to create something new, and it was almost like their hands were just moving effortlessly across the keyboard. They experienced almost an out-of-body experience as they watched themselves creating something new, one of the best experiences they ever had in their lives. He also found this in ice skaters. They would reflect on certain moments when they were gliding across the ice, having an almost trance-like utopic experience. So much happiness, so much peace in this one particular moment. And he would find this in CEOs and in snowboarders and in everything in between, that when someone who is highly gifted and highly skilled in some particular area, and they were able to engage in that activity at a high level, not to where it was too challenging. If it was too challenging, they would be scared. If it was under challenging, they would get bored or apathetic. But when challenge met skill level, they encountered what the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi calls flow. And in those moments, what he observed from a psychologist's perspective is that they temporarily forgot about themselves. Like they didn't even really know how they were feeling, if they were hungry, if they were tired. It was like the entire bandwidth of their human capacity was so focused on something outside of themselves, they were actually forgetting about themselves in that moment. And it was that moment that they would describe as the happiest, most ecstatic moment of their lives. A moment living completely beyond themselves. And if you think about it, this is just like normal life. I mean, we would all say that our happiest moments in life are moments when we're focusing outside of ourselves, when we're hanging out with people that we love, or when we're playing a sport or engaged in an activity or discovering or learning. Those are happy experiences. Conversely, the times that don't rank highest on people's happiness list is times when they're focused on themselves, looking in the mirror, soul-searching, navel-gazing, listening to their own heartbeat. Those aren't the happiest moments of life. Computer analysis was done on suicidal poets' writings, and what was found to be distinctive about their works is that they had a significant increased usage of the personal pronouns I, me, and my. You see, the problem with the typical approach to happiness is that it's very me-centric. It's all about what I need. The problem is that happiness isn't found by focusing on me at all. Instead, happiness is found when we completely forget about ourselves. That is when we encounter flow, according to Csikszentmihalyi. So now let me tell you about flow according to Christ. Christ came 2,000 years ago, and when he came, he said, I did not come to be served, but to serve. And he poured his life out for many. And he said that those who would be his followers, that the defining characteristic of their lives is that they would also be known as servants. As people who put themselves last and they live to pour themselves out into others. And in fact, he went on to say that then and only then is the time when you would be experiencing life to its fullest measure. One of the things I get to see in the church is people rise up and decide to kind of throw away a me-centric approach to living, and instead to roll up their sleeves and start to discover their unique gifting and wiring, and then begin to serve and pour out and build into others in the church. In fact, I just got an email from a good friend of mine. He was emailing me because 4 years ago, he accepted the challenge to be a house group leader in our high school ministry. And although it took him rearranging his life and starting to give so many hours to pouring into these students, 4 years later, he was emailing me to thank me, because he was reflecting on the last 4 years and how God had used his contribution in order to pour into students. And they were reaching 4 times as many students in the high school that he was overseeing as the ministry was 4 years ago. And he could not have been more grateful to have been used by God. I love hearing stories like that. I think about the first time that I decided to serve at church. I showed up and I just found a way to serve, and it was great. I wasn't focused on myself. It was an incredible experience. And so I went back a second time and a third time, and beware, you're going to discover this whole serving thing, it's addictive. It feels so liberating to be focused on something outside of you. And as great as that felt for me, it still wasn't flow. In fact, I didn't encounter the flow through serving until someone came along and said, hey, here's a ministry, you lead it. And once I was given the mantle of leadership, I started to notice things flowing out of me that I had no idea were there. I found myself casting vision, building teams and motivating people and aligning people and uniting them in a common direction. And it was so far beyond me. And I started to see God doing a work through me into others' lives in ways that I had never encountered before. You know, God has uniquely gifted every single one of you with a special ability to make an impact and a difference in the lives of your fellow believers. Do you know that? And when you are not using that gift to an appropriate challenge level, you kind of get disengaged from your faith. You get a little apathetic about it all. You get a little bored with the whole thing. You see, a climber doesn't really experience flow when they sit down to compose music. Instead, they experience frustration. And a composer, on the other hand, they don't experience flow when they try to climb. They're going to experience frustration as well. What are you experiencing? Is it flow or is it frustration? See, frustration comes when we're either over-challenged or we're under-challenged or we're serving completely outside of the gifting that God has given to us. But flow comes whenever the right challenge level meets the right skill level. And then, and only then, do we see God moving through us in an incredible way, have an amazing impact on the people around us, and have the highest levels of fulfillment we have ever experienced before. And what would it look like for you to find an opportunity to serve in the church and pour yourself out into others, out of a place that God has uniquely enabled and wired you to be able to do? You know, according to the scriptures, not only would your life have the greatest level of impact by serving out of your unique gifting, but that you will also experience the highest level of fulfillment that you have ever experienced. I don't know about you, but I imagine how amazing it would be if all of us began to live that way. So I say that as a people, we become those who completely reject this idea that the way to become happy as a person is by just pouring more and more stuff into us, and instead accept the truth that the way to happiness is by pouring ourselves out into others. What might God do through us as a community? I can only imagine. So let's find out.